Thank you all for being here. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first university-wide annual celebration of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. My name is Annika Wolters, and I'm the president of our student body here at Western Washington University. It's a great honor to thank you for being here. I thank everyone who came before me, and I thank everyone who has made a positive contribution to the well-being of our community and our neighbors. Before we continue, and before we hear from the president of the Black Student Union, Jordan Butler, I would like to ask sophomore and marketing student Stacy Ejim to sing the hymn, Lift Every Voice. This hymnal was first written as a poem by James Weldon Johnson and was first performed in 1900 by 500 school children in Jacksonville, Florida. It was soon adopted as the official song of the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Today it is often referred to as the Black National Anthem. Lift every voice. Come up here, Stacy.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won.
Wow, Stacy, that was great. Hi, my name is Jordan Butler. I'm the president of the Black Student Union this year. I'm a sophomore here at Western, and from Cincinnati, Ohio, studying political science and education. So first off, I'm extremely grateful to have this opportunity to speak here at this event, because you see, this is the first real event of its kind where Western Washington is backing and sponsoring a Martin Luther King celebration. So with that, I'd like to thank President Brice, the associated students, event services and catering, and especially the librarians for letting us have this event in this room. Also, I'd like to give a special shout out to Annika Wolters. She is our AS president, and she's doing amazing things, and we're so thankful to have her. And we really, at BSU, we know her before she was the president, when she's the former vice president for BSU, so before the fancy office and the nice and the nice view. So thank you, because she's a beautifully strong woman, and we're so grateful to have someone like you. So really comes down to it, the Black Student Union and its members are not the only ones responsible for commemorating Dr. Martin Luther King. In his teachings, we all know that he promotes this ideology of unity and togetherness, and this event should really represent that. It should represent and hold accountable the different organizations and clubs here at Western. So the Black Student Union, Western Washington University, and the community itself, the Ethnic Student Center, and really any other student, staff, faculty member that supports and believes in the dreams and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. So what does MLK and Martin Luther King Day really mean to me? And how do we or should we really celebrate it? Well, probably like most of y'all growing up in elementary school, and middle school, and high school, and to some extent like college, Martin Luther King is pretty much like that 3-day weekend. And we all know that, staying up late on Sunday, not going to work on Monday, and then kind of putting the remembrance of Martin Luther King and the civil rights on the back burner to whatever activities you have going on during the day. And when you really think about it, it's hard to celebrate something that isn't really finished yet. And to some extent, we still are in our own civil rights movement. And we are still going through a lot of the same police brutalities and oppressions and injustice today. So how do we really celebrate something that isn't really over? Well, we have events just like this. We have events of remembrance so that we don't forget where we came from, so that we don't forget who we are, so we don't forget how far we've come, and so we don't forget the injustices that were faced and that we still face today. And most importantly, so we don't forget Martin Luther King and the legacies of those who led the civil rights movement. So with that legacy in mind, there are a couple of characteristics that I truly admire about Martin Luther King and the other actors and players of the civil rights movement. The first is Dr. King's profound faith in God. Well, it's essential to remember that Dr. King was, at first, he was a reverend, so he was a doctor in theology. And growing up, I'm from Ohio, so I grew up in church, and I think that it's extremely important to have that foundation because it was the foundation for a lot of his speeches and his actions. So the second characteristic that I think is extremely important and admirable to me is his humility. Even as a figurehead to the civil rights movement, Dr. King, he realized that he wasn't the only one working hard. He acknowledged all the others that were behind him because it wasn't just him in those marches, it wasn't just him in those sit-ins, it wasn't just him in those boycotts and other activist movements. It was generations and centuries of folks who had been oppressed. It was my grandparents, it was your grandparents, it was all of our ancestors to some extent that were there supporting Dr. King, and he realized that he was a part of something bigger. So we are here today to remember the achievements of Dr. Martin Luther King, a man with limitless courage and conviction. So let's never forget his legacy or the countless others that helped play a role in the civil rights movement. Thank you. All right, next I would like to introduce our Dean of Students, Ted Pratt.
Man, I feel like old people trying to get up. We don't have any stairs the stairs over here, right? We should move the stairs over here for old people, right? I say older people. Jambo, konnichiwa, anehaseyo, indimina, ganahanu, talofa. Hello. I'd just like to express what I think Dr. King would very much have appreciated when we start conversations that we're able to speak in a number of languages to a number of people. That was an opportunity that he had opened up, and as a little boy, I tried to take full advantage of that. I've been at Western a long time. This is going on my 28th year. And people always say, well, what was that like when you first came to Western? And it was very interesting, I can say. I say 28 years in the administration, but I also did my undergraduate work here. And as a student, I think there was a handful of us that were African American here. But we were mighty few. Joyce Taylor, Channel 5 News, she was here. My buddy Mark Robertson, who went on to become assistant superintendent in DC schools. We had a very powerful crew. A couple attorneys came out. And when I look at that and I think about the experience, and I hear people say sometimes that, you know, have we really gone that far? We really haven't gone that far. And I think, oh, no. You can't say that. You can't say that. Because if that were true, then I wouldn't be standing here in front of you, and I certainly wouldn't be the dean of students. When I first came to Western, or returned to Western as an administrator, my job here was to increase the numbers of minority students on, on campus. At the time that I came to Western, back in '87, we were 4% ethnic minority students. Today, and these were smaller numbers back then too. We were about 9,500 students. Today, we're at about 15,000, and the minority population is comprised of 24% of that, which is on par with the state. So that's pretty impressive. When I first came, we had the lowest ethnic minority student population in the state. That is not the case today. I think UW is the only one that sits just a hair above us. So it's pretty impressive. We've made some significant changes. Commitments are very important. The fact that we have this event today that we're saying is our annual event, we're going to be bringing this back, says that we've made some significant strides, and I can owe some of that right there to the queen that's sitting over there, Annika. And you know, when I sit here as an African American and I think of what is my role here, and I look and I think, it's to do this. It's to help these types of diversities happen here. It wasn't about the clash. It was about the change. You know, and people say, are we there yet? We're not there yet. But my important thing is, what are we going to do to get where we really want to be? We know we're not there yet, but I know we are well on our way. I did a presentation 2 weeks ago at Squalicum High School, and students were so quiet and so polite, and they were so diverse. It just kind of shocked me, you know. Like, I thought young people were supposed to be texting and doing all that stuff. I mean, they were glued on me. Almost made me nervous. We want this. And the questions that they asked afterwards, and they were talking about, we know that there were some things that you didn't say, but we can feel what we're supposed to do. When you started talking about Dr. King's life, and at the age of 19, in 1948, Dr. King had finished his baccalaureate degree. He was 19 years old. Most of them were like, oh my God, that's our age. By the time he was 24, he was married to Coretta Scott. By the time he was 25, he had his doctorate, was on his way to Alabama to help out with the boycott and meet with Rosa Parks. And I think, who might have ever complained about doing what's right and having to push forward? Can't afford to get tired. He never did. He only lived to be 33 years old. 33 years old. Right now I think of it, heck, he could have been my son. I was like, 33, God, my son is 30 years old. That's frightening. But how much he was able to accomplish in that short period of time, and I think, as Dean of Students, what am I giving back? And I look around and I see the diversity in the room, and I look around and I think, well, I'm not the only dean of color at Western. That's impressive. When I was a student, there weren't any deans of color. Things have changed. We are changing. And I'm proud of Western, and I'm proud of what you are doing. We get students like Annika. We got Jesse. I don't know how many of you guys know Jesse Moore. Jesse was one of my boys. Jesse was in the he spent a lot of time working with the Black Student Union, with the Ethnic Student Center, and Jesse is now writing speeches for Obama. Pretty impressive. I'm looking at all of you out here and I'm thinking, okay, who's going to be the next what? And I know that it's coming. And this is an opportunity. I would say, as I look out, and I had some tidbit of information to give you about tomorrow, I would say, let's not linger on some of the negatives that are happening in our states or in our country. You know, when we look back, like when I was at Squalicum, and students said, well, we know that you didn't tell us everything that you could have told us. And I said, well, what do you, like what? And they responded to me, and, well, there's a lot of things that are going on in the country right now. I said, yes. And they said, it feels like it's gone backwards somewhat. I said, well, only if you let it. Only if you let it. Because it does. Some of the experiences that have been happening throughout the country do put me back in the mind of the 60s. But out of great fires come great leaders. Dr. King was one of them. To be that young, to be called to duty like that, incredible, incredible. So what are you going to be called to duty to do in terms of making that change and helping us get there? As a people, as a nation. That's important for me to give you as a seed for thought. Because you're here for a reason. You're here for a reason. And we're all here to help make sure that you are successful in your venture here. So, having said that, and welcoming you to this fantastic opportunity to get together and give thanks and to the great, late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Coming from a long line of preachers, I like to hear the congregation say amen. 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 All right.
Thank you, Dean Pratt. I'll now introduce the featured speaker. His name is Dr. Darryl Brice. He's an instructor of Sociology and Diversity and Globalism Studies at Highline Community College. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Darryl Brice.
How y'all doing? How y'all doing? Man, it's good to be here. Since Ted, Jordan, and Annika said everything, y'all have a good night. I'll see y'all, later. No, it's cool. It's a great opportunity. I had a good time today exploring your campus. Got to see the little green men. I thought that was a joke. Y'all really do have green men on campus? That's cool. So when I was asked to do this, like the heavens lined up. I'm usually booked up on MLK. They called me, like, you available? I'm like, man, I'm there, right? Anything. So I'm glad to be here. And what I wanted to talk about today is sort of this idea of MLK that a lot of people don't have an opportunity to sort of explore and know about. A lot of ways we'll talk about a little later, his image has been co-opted, right? He was extremely radical, against the status quo, and we're going to get into some of that kind of stuff, and we're going to talk about, why that is. But I want to start with this idea of bread and, Circuses, by this, Roman poet. And they said when the Roman Empire was about to fall, one of the things they did to keep their citizens occupied was to, give them a lot of food, right, in the form of bread, and to give them a lot of entertainment in terms of chariot races, gladiator battles, so on and so forth, so that the populace wouldn't be involved in politics and knowing what's going on in politics. Does that sound familiar? Right? Anybody know who the quarterback of the Seahawks is? You start asking people who the, Secretary of Defense is, that kind of stuff. You're like, huh? Right. So this is what has happened with, Dr. King's image too, or sort of this bread and circuses. We keep people occupied with the image that, a lot of people want them to have, and not more of his, radical, images. So as a sociologist, I have to start with a sociological concept, the sociological imagination by C. Wright Mills, right? We got any sociology people in here? It's usually a popular major because people think it's easy. That's all the sociology majors we got in here. Whatever, you're gonna learn some sociology tonight. All right. Got one more. So C. Wright Mills argued that having a sociological imagination was the ability to separate, personal problems from larger structural issues. In a highly individualistic society like the United States, a lot of things gets reduced to the individual, and people don't want to look at social structures that might be causing, the problems in individuals' lives. But I like his second point, and I think it's pertinent to what we're going to talk about with Dr. King, is this ability to, this intersection between, biography, right, and history. Right, what's biography? I'm an interactive professor, by the way. I'm going to be talking to y'all. It's that call and response thing in the black church that you get. What's biography? Huh? Life story, right? All right. What's history? The winner story. Absolutely. Absolutely. History is usually, written by the victor. But in general, what he was talking about with this intersection between history and biography is this idea that all of y'all individual stories are rooted in a much larger historical context. I always give myself as an example to students, right? So when my ancestors came to this country as enslaved Africans, they weren't even able to read. And I have a PhD, right? So when you stop and process that, I didn't come out and was like, I want to get a PhD. There was a whole lot of things historically that had to happen in order for me to have the opportunities that I have now. So we're standing on a lot of people's shoulders. I saw Maya Angelou speak one time, and she was on the stage by herself, and she was talking about how crowded it was up here, right? And I feel that way every time I get to speak. And what she meant was, all of her ancestors was up here, with her, holding her up, right? And this is the message that y'all been getting from the, 3 speakers that spoke, right? Remembering our ancestors. So when you think about this, intersection between history and biography, think about the people that came before us. And so when we think about Dr. King, I like to start with another sociologist, Dr. Du Bois, who's largely forgotten in the field. People are always surprised when I, tell them I got a PhD in sociology and I had to read 0 Du Bois to get it. I'm gonna just let that sit with you for a second. I got the highest degree you can get in the field of sociology. And the pioneer of American sociology, I had to read 0 of his work to get that PhD. He was largely marginalized and still is marginalized in the field. If you take any sociology class, they talk about the big 3, Marx, Weber, and Durkheim. My students learn the big 4, right? And I had a student call one of their professors on it when they transferred to UW one time, and the professor didn't have an answer because they ain't read no Du Bois, right? But the pioneer of American sociology largely gets omitted, from the field. All right, 1, he was extremely radical in his thoughts. He was one of the first founding members of the NAACP. He was so radical, he got kicked out of the NAACP. Right? Imagine that. You get kicked out of an organization you start. First person of African descent to get a PhD from Harvard. It's hard to get a PhD from Harvard now. Can you imagine being the first black person to get a PhD from Harvard? Like, how, intelligent, right, above board you must have been of your peers, right, to do that? One of the first to use, the method of triangulation, right? He did this study called the Philadelphia Negro when he finally did get a chance to, research and, teach, right? Where he used census data, he also used statistical data, and he also used qualitative data. He went out and did, conducted interviews. So he got this, broad, sort of big picture. They say if you compare that with, sort of the work of Durkheim, one of the other big 3, that his work towers over, Durkheim. There's a book coming out from a professor at Northwestern where he's arguing that the whole Chicago school, so those of you that don't know, right, they're like the urban sociology, right, like plagiarized Du Bois' work and gave him no credit. Right, so a brilliant scholar, largely omitted, but guess who didn't forget him? Dr. King, right? Dr. King was a sociology major, right? His bachelor's degree was in sociology. So Du Bois actually died August 27th, 1963. What happened on August 28th? The March on Washington. He died the day before the March on Washington after fighting, his whole life, right, for racial equality. Didn't get to see it. But Dr. King, in a meeting prior to, the March on Washington, eulogized Du Bois. Right, and this is some of the things he had to say about him. Dr. Du Bois was not only an intellectual giant, exploring the frontiers of knowledge, he was in the first place a teacher. He would have wanted his life to teach us something about emancipation. He died in exile, praised sparingly, and in many circles ignored. And as you can see, still, right, ignored. So when we think about Dr. King, man, you stole some of my thunder, it's all good. You wanted to drop numbers and when he went to school and how old he was and what year this happened and, damn. Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Leave me something to say. Give me a hard time. But I just show this to show y'all how much of a scholar he was. When you stop and think about how much of a scholar Du Bois was, you stop and think about, how we rest on the shoulders of those that came before us, right? You see the same, scholarship, right? The same intellectual, giant that emerges. But one of the things that happened with Dr. King's legacy is he became, sort of too popular and too important to marginalize, right? So when you can't omit him, you have to do other things. And so one of the things that has happened to his legacy is it's been, co-opted by people like Walmart, right? What do y'all know about Walmart in terms of, equity and how they treat their workers? And you think Dr. King would have been supportive of Walmart? That'd have been a place he was boycotting, right? But, they've co-opted his legacy and have done what they've wanted with it. So you see this a lot of times in terms of the language that they use. So they focus on this idea of equality. Yeah, we treat everybody the same. Where, issues of social justice have really, sort of shifted to this idea of equity, meaning people that need, get what they need. I always use the example of the emergency room. Any of y'all ever been in the emergency room? I'm always surprised at how few people put their damn hands up when I ask that question. Y'all are the healthiest people I've ever met. You ain't never hurt yourself. You ain't never, got a real bad fever. You don't get sick. What do y'all drink out here? I want some. Like 2 people put their hands up. Y'all know what an emergency room is? I'll take that, right? All right. So in the emergency room, you have people, right? Somebody might have a flu. Somebody might have broke their leg. Somebody's eye might be hanging out, right? Equality mindset is if the doctor comes out there and say, oh, today is Tylenol day. No matter what's wrong with you, everybody gets Tylenol. Good luck, right? Equity mindset is you assess people based off of their need, and then you give them what they need in order to restore their health. Does that make sense? All right. And so Coca-Cola too, right? Can somebody play that clip for me? So I'll show you a short commercial on Coca-Cola, and then I'll show you the next clip, which is why this is funny. It really is a video attached to it. Can enjoy the Coca-Cola music. You might have to exit and then pull up. We're having technical difficulties. We're gonna get a video up. I didn't know it was gonna be that tricky, man. My fault. Yeah. Uh-oh. We need technical support. I see campus police back there. Hey, you know anything about PowerPoint? Okay. How y'all doing? Stuff making sense so far, though? Yeah.
So if we were to read one thing by Dr. Du Bois, what should we read?
Oh, man, the choices. They said, I've seen somewhere that in terms of his articles, because he used to write for the Crisis, the NAACP magazine, and, all his other articles as well as his books, I've seen something that said he probably have over 5,000 written works. So, probably the one I would suggest, and the one that people probably know the most, is either the Philadelphia Negro, which was the pioneering study, or the Souls of Black Folks. Yeah. He also wrote one called The Souls of White Folks. That's, pretty good too. Can you play the next one?
Atlanta is Auburn Avenue, the heart of the civil rights movement, a movement Coca-Cola has a troubled history with. I'm outside the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, which is the church that Martin Luther King Jr. used to co-pastor with his father. And in fact, you can hear his speeches being played on a public address system just across the way on this little plaza. In fact, in the last speech that Martin Luther King made, the day before he was killed, on the 4th of April 1968, Martin Luther King made this amazing speech. And in it, he actually called for a boycott of the Coca-Cola company, and we're going to find out why. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. travelled to Memphis to back a boycott of companies deemed to be discriminating against black workers. Here, he made one of his most iconic speeches, known as, "I have been to the mountaintop."
Always anchor our external direct action. So as a result of this, we're asking you tonight to go out and tell your neighbors not to buy Coca-Cola in Memphis.
You cut it.
One of the people carrying on King...
Sociologists are skeptics, so I always like to have the evidence, right? So on the one hand, you have a commercial, and on the next slide, you see him, telling people to boycott Coca-Cola. That's what I'm talking about co-opting, sort of his image. Right? Too large a figure to ignore, so you do what you want with it that, meets your needs. It'd be interesting to see if, Coca-Cola, still has an issue with, race and, diversity. It'd be fascinating to see. Cool. Yeah. We got another one. It's a while from now, though. So, Bush, once again, sort of this idea. And Dr. King sort of gets stuck in this moment of dreaming. Any of y'all, notice that? Right, every time people talk about him, they talk about, the dream. And I always tell people that you don't get assassinated for dreaming. Right, dreaming don't get you killed. It's all of the other stuff that he was calling the people to task on. But I put this up there because you can see, once again, the reference to you can make America a better place and fulfill the dream of, Martin Luther King, because George Bush was so well known for his efforts for equity and justice. Once again, co-optation. And so Bush's economic, sort of initiatives were, sort of based off of, Reaganomics, which is based off of trickle-down theory, which is based off of this guy, another sociologist, who gets mentioned in the field of sociology, but came up with this extremely sexist, racist, classist, theory of social Darwinism. So y'all familiar with, Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest? He thought that could be applied to the social world, and it was used as a justification for things like, African enslavement, Holocaust, right? He didn't believe in any public support, right? If you couldn't afford, medical care, you didn't deserve to have it. In fact, it was good because then the weaker, portions of the population would die off, right? So the idea of economics, that Bush supported was based off of, sort of Spencer's social Darwinism, which is fascinating that this guy gets mentioned, all right? The other thing is he gets, parts of him get omitted. When you co-opt, you take what you want and then you leave the other parts out. Anybody, familiar with Howard Zinn's work? All right, People's History of the United States, one of my favorite historians, because he writes from the oppressed people's point of view. As Nick mentioned earlier, most history is written by the victor, So, large amounts of people's history gets, left out. So Zen would always say, omission is worse than lying. Because if I omit something, it's as if it never existed. If I lie to you, at least you have the basis to go check it out. Right? So when we teach history classes, when we teach any subject, right, you just omit scholars of color, right? You omit the impacts that women have made to a field. You omit LGBTQI, folks and the contributions that they've made. And students then get this perception that none of those people mean anything to the field or the discipline. Right? How many of y'all been in classes where you don't get, any theorists or any, people that came up with concepts that, look like you or are reflective of you? All right? And how much is that normalized? Could you imagine if I taught a sociology class and only taught black scholars? Don't you think somebody might raise their hand and be like, something missing? You mean white people didn't contribute anything to the field of sociology? Right? But that question never happens in, other disciplines. But omission versus lying, that's a picture of me and my son. The problem when you have smart kids is it comes back to bite you in the ass sometime. Right? And so my son had mastered this idea of omission versus lying very early on. He was like 4, and he was going to Montessori school. And if you know anything about Montessori, whenever there's an incident, there's a write-up. I'm like, damn, he had a record when he was 4. Right? I went to go pick him up one day. The teacher came running over to me. She had an envelope. She said, Mikey choked. I thought she said Owen. Mikey choked Owen today. And my first thought was, well, what did Owen do to him? Right? Pretty peaceful dude. And so, when we was getting in the car, I was, buttoning him up. And I said, Mikey, did you choke Owen today? He looked me in my face. He said, nah, I ain't choke Owen today. I was like, all right, cool. It ain't worth it. Let's get home and eat, right? So I drive home. I get home and open the letter, and it says, Evan, right? I was like, Mikey, I thought you told me you ain't choked nobody today. He said, you asked me if I choked Owen. Right? So he just omitted the part that there was some choking going on. He knew he had choked somebody. I just had the name wrong. Right? He just omitted the fact that he did some choking. So it's like, look, man. So a way that, it sort of plays out in, everyday circumstances, a lot of people think, man, that can't happen to me, right? Things can't be omitted. I always tell people that the Star Spangled Banner has 4 verses. You only sing the first one, and there's a reason you only sing the first one. It's because the third verse is about the maintenance of slavery, right, in the United States. Francis Scott Key, the person who wrote this in 1814 after the War of 1812. Most of y'all don't know about the War of 1812 because the U.S. got stomped. Right? One of the few, battles that, y'all probably know about is the Battle of New Orleans, because, they won that one. Anybody know why they won? The war was over. Right? They fought the battle after the war was over. Right? So Francis Scott Key was kind of pissed off. One of the things that enslaved Africans was promised was a better life, when they came over here with, sort of colonists. One of the things they found out was that wasn't true. Right, so with this, sort of beef that was going on, a lot of the enslaved Africans was like, man, we might as well, go back, where we were. We might as well side with them. Right? Why would we want these inhumane conditions here? And so that pissed Francis Scott Key over, pissed him off, and this is what he wrote. All right, this is the third verse. And where's that band who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home in the country should leave us no more? That blood has washed out that foul footsteps pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight, meaning those that wanted to go back, or the gloom of the grave. We'll kill you if you want to. And the Star-Spangled Banner triumphed that wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Right? Most people don't even know that there's other verses attached to the Star-Spangled Banner. So you see how omission takes place? You just omit it. Just keep playing the same one that you want people to hear over and over again. You don't even, begin to question something that we stand up and sing all the time. So when you talk about Dr. King's legacy, I always like to remind people, how much, against the system, he was, how counter, status quo he was, right? This is what leads you to getting arrested over 30 times. You don't get arrested over 30 times for dreaming, once again, right? So this is even before, assassination. This was him disrupting business as usual. This was part of that civil disobedience campaign, right? The sit-ins, the marches. You ain't gonna be comfortable. Like, one of the things me and my partner always say, man, if the spot messed up for me, it's gonna be messed up for you. If I'm uncomfortable, you're gonna be uncomfortable, right? And that's one thing that Dr. King knew very well, and he was, very good at, sort of doing. Like, over 30 times, Right, one of my favorite quotes is, because it's a law doesn't make it just. Right, so he violated a lot of unjust laws. So Dr. King in popularity, he went from, Nobel Prize winner, Time Magazine's Man of the Year, to being, followed by the FBI. Y'all library might actually have this book. I gave it to a student at, Wacom the last time I was here. I want my book back now. Right? I was like, I get another one. I ain't never get another one. So this is the COINTELPRO papers. Right? One of the problems about living in a free society is that things become declassified after a certain number of years. So these are actual declassified FBI documents of their surveillance of Dr. King, the American Indian movement, the socialist movements, at that time, and what their goal was in terms of trying to break these movements up and stop them. So when you think about status quo, when the FBI is on the side of maintaining racist policies, stop and think about that kind of society. Right? One might say we're not far from that, now. So this is, one of the documents, right? Point 2. One of the things that they wanted to do was prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Malcolm X might have been such a messiah, right? This was after Malcolm X was assassinated. He is a martyr of the movement today. Martin Luther King, first person on the list. Stokely Carmichael and Elijah Muhammad, leader of the Nation of Islam, all aspired to this position. Elijah Muhammad is less of a threat because of his age. He was getting old. King could be a very real contender for this position, should he abandon his supposed obedience to white liberal doctrines, right, i.e. nonviolence, and embrace black nationalism. Carmichael has the necessary charisma to be a real threat in this way. So that one jumps out at me. And then it's another one where they talk about point 3, about what, the FBI should go about doing, right? Prevent violence on the part of the black nationalist groups. This is of primary importance and, of course, a goal of our investigative activity. It should also be a goal of the counterintelligence program. Through counterintelligence, it should be possible to pinpoint potential troublemakers and neutralize them. You can figure out what they meant by neutralize yourself. I'll let you formulate your own opinions before they exercise their potential for violence. Right? So, Time Magazine's Man of the Year, top of the list on, the FBI, watch, list. So you can start to see, right, how radical he became. Also, as he aged in his short life, right, he became more and more, increasingly radical. So when he came out against Vietnam, a lot of people said, this sort of spelled his demise. This spelled the end of him when he came out against, Vietnam. This is when he took a lot of heat, right? When you stop and think about, like character, and living with principles, right? When you're taking heat, character is, you don't change your message just because you're taking a little heat when you're on the side of, justice, right? So what he was talking about with Vietnam, and you can think about it in terms of, this war, I'm always impressed at how prophetic, he was. If you look at some of his stuff, it applies directly, today, right? Extremely prophetic. One of the things he basically said, I summarize this, is the bombs that we drop in Vietnam actually explode here. And what he meant by that is all of the economic, all of the money, all of the defense spending that's going, to, bomb people over in Vietnam is actually cutting out social programs at home. Does that sound familiar? Right. So Dr. King was talking about this in '67, right? This is exactly what he was talking about. Bombs that we drop, they explode here. Also, the Poor People's Campaign. Now, it's one thing to be seen as, sort of a black nationalist, and you galvanizing the black community. Now, when you start talking about poor people, there's a lot of poor people, right? You transcending a lot of, I'm used to being mic'd up, because I like to talk with my hands. That's why I'm glad ain't nobody in front of me. I'm smacking people, right? But you just talk about poor people, you talk about galvanizing a whole lot of people, on issues. And one of the things he sort of forced and, pushed LBJ on was to fund these anti-poverty programs and, these slum, housing, right? This inhumane, living conditions that people, lived in. And their plan was, and it went on after he was assassinated, but the movement wasn't quite the same, after that. The plan was to set up camps in DC and actually shut down business as usual, rotating, 50,000 people. Can you imagine 50,000 people camped out in DC and you just rotate and make sure your numbers stay at 50,000 until you get what you want? Right? Might people start listening to, what you have to say, in your policies? If you could do that, if y'all could roll up on a president's office with 50,000 students, a day, shutting down business as usual, somebody gonna listen to your demands, right? If you want to think about it on a smaller scale. So these are some images, from the Poor People's Campaign. They say one of the things that happened was, they had a huge storm that came through. And so where they were camped out, it became all muddy, right? So you're already in a movement where you're being brutalized and nobody's listening to you. Can you imagine adding inclement weather on top of that? And Dr. King was just assassinated, right? Morale was, real low. They said it was real hard to keep morale up. So this Poor People's Campaign actually, died out. So one more video. You gonna be able to find it this time? All right. This one is on creative maladjustment. This is one of his least known, sort of videos. And this was a speech he gave to, APA. So he was very much talking to, people in the academic sector too. Man, I did not know it was gonna be that much trouble.
Modern psychology has a word that is probably used more than any other word in psychology. It is the word maladjusted. It is the ringing cry of modern child psychology, maladjusted. Now, of course, we all want to live a well-adjusted life in order to avoid neurotic and schizophrenic personalities. But as I move toward my conclusion, I would like to say to you today, in a very honest manner, that there are some things in our society and some things in our world for which I'm proud to be maladjusted. And I call upon all men of goodwill to be maladjusted to these things until the good society is realized. I must honestly say to you that I never intend to adjust myself to racial segregation and discrimination. I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few, and leave millions of God's children smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society.
Dr. King, ladies and gentlemen, all right? So when you think about that, stop and think about this idea of not being adjusted, right? Something is wrong when you well adjusted to, all of the things that's, going on still in society today, right? If you living your life, comfortably with all of the things that's going on, you should be having some kind of, intellectual vertigo or intellectual dizziness, around this idea. But this idea of not to become adjusted, all right? Not to become adjusted to these things that's going on. So there's still a lot of work to be done. All right, and this is when the sociologist in me, sort of comes out. So I'm gonna throw a bunch of, data and research and, that kind of stuff. Once again, so you don't have to believe me. All right, we look at the data. So one of the first things we can look at is, sort of the percent of, the population below the poverty level, and 68. In 2006, right, percent ain't changed much. And we talking about Census Bureau data. Right, this stuff is easy to, sort of find and, process. Stop and think about how much this stuff is omitted, right? You don't even get this kind of stuff. So it's still a lot of work to be done. One of the ways that this manifests itself, I'm sure a lot of y'all are familiar with this experiment out of MIT, the name experiment, right, where they sent out 5,000 job applications. Half of the names were black sounding names, half of the names are white sounding names. And if you don't know what white sounding names and black sounding names are, the name of the study is perfect. Are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal? Right? And what they wanted to see, they set up a fake call center. By the way, they sent these from entry-level positions on up to top-level positions, and all of the resumes were the same qualifications. They wanted to see, if there was any discrepancy in who got callbacks. The white-sounding names got 50% more callbacks, right, than the black-sounding names. Just off a name. So we ain't even talking about a face showing up. We ain't even talking about you got the call to come in and interview. We're talking about a whole crop of people being weeded out by name, right? So is there still job discrimination? Yes, right? This one was, even worse, mark of a criminal record, right? By Diva Pager. She's at Princeton now, I believe. She was at Northwestern when she conducted this study. And she was just interested to see initially if a criminal record affects your employability, right? A drug arrest. What do we know in terms of, a drug arrest on having that on your record? Does it affect your employability? One of the things she had on top of that was she disaggregated the data by, race. So she had whites with a drug arrest, whites without a drug arrest, blacks with a drug arrest, blacks without a drug arrest. So given the MIT experiment, who did the best in the job market? Whites without a drug arrest. Who did the second best? Yep, she found that whites with a drug arrest did better in the job market than blacks without. All right, and hit me up. At the end, my email gonna be up there. I'll shoot you these studies, right, so you can look at yourself. Right? And they not that old, right? I think this was 2003. The other one was 2004. So when we look at this from an economic standpoint, United for Fair Economy puts this out every year around Dr. King's, birthday, right? The State of the Dream report. And what they do is they look at economics by race, right? So there's a, racialized, sort of class distinction that goes on. And so I just like these graphics visually because they easy to read, right? When y'all in class and they put up graphics sometime and they, say, interpret this graph, right? Don't you be like, And then one of the things we as professors don't do is we give you 10 seconds. Oh, y'all ain't interpreted the graph yet? What's wrong, right? So these are pretty easy to read. All right, so 68 and 2007. All right, so the first thing that jumped out at me is not what initially jumps out at people. Right? So what's one of the distinctions you see? What jumps out at you immediately?
Whites' income has jumped more than the African American.
Yep, cool. Anything else? Exactly. That's what jumped out to me too. Yep. I was like, wow. So if you look at, white salary in 68, black salary in 2007 haven't even reached that. Right? When you stop and think about job discrimination and, the reasons, that might be. Right? This wasn't the worst graph when I was going through this. This one really tripped me out. So when you think about net worth, right? Things that you have that, assets that you have that appreciate in value. Right? You see any distinctions by race? All right. So it's pretty clear. There's still a lot of work to be done, right, given these discrepancies. Now, we could argue about why the discrepancies are what they are. I think the prior studies kind of, add some of that, but we can get to some more stuff. The crazy thing is, this is a book by a UW professor, right, Becky Pettit. And in this book, one of the things she says is, a lot of that data is even skewed, meaning that the discrepancies are probably worse, because what she found was that's based off of, like homes, like census tract data. She was like, what about people that's incarcerated? Right, they're not making incomes. So if you throw those numbers in there, those discrepancies are probably even worse. Right, so this is what she, picked up in Invisible Men. That's a cool book too, by the way. So one of the ways I like to think about how this plays out is, we can talk about Bonilla Silva's work. Anybody familiar with Bonilla Silva? All right, he's at Duke. All right, Racism Without Racists. He talks about how, you can have, racism and, a so-called colorblind, society, what he called post-civil rights, racism. And, based off of tons of, qualitative data, he said, whites developed these 4 frames to justify all those discrepancies that we just talked about, right? And I'm sure y'all done ran into people that, use these, at least one of them. I usually run into people that use at least one of these a day, right? So abstract liberalism is the first one. Right? He said it's just like economic liberalism, this laissez-faire, sort of hands-off, that on surface level they'd be like, yeah, we should have, equality. Hell no, we don't want you to do anything, institute any programs to really do something about it. That's unfair. Right? Yeah, these discrepancies are bad, but don't you go changing policies to make sure that we can actually diversify faculty, right? Administration. So that's that abstract, liberalism, right? In favor of equality, but opposed to things like, affirmative action that would actually bring about some movement. Naturalization, I'm sure you hear this all of the time. People just like hanging around with people like themselves. So they just happen to move in neighborhoods, homogenous neighborhoods with people like themselves, right? They just like being around people like themselves. No, the historical legacy of redlining and residential segregation don't have nothing to do with that. They just like being around people like them, right? So that's that naturalization frame. Cultural racism, this is one of my favorites, right? Because they didn't got wise. Historically, this was biological racism, right? That blacks and Latinos are just intellectually inferior. Now it's blamed on our cultures, right? They just don't care about things like education. Don't care about things like school. With no look at the curriculum, right? Or how it's irrelevant to their lives, or what the teacher that might be racist might be doing, right? So none of that kind of stuff. But it's all on, sort of cultural values. Minimization of racism. We were talking earlier, to some students about this one, right? This that idea that it's better now from the past. I got a friend named Dr. Jared Ball. He was like, everything is better when you're comparing it to African enslavement. Like, what's not better than that? Of course, when that's your benchmark, everything is better. For real? Now let's talk about some things and resources that other people got. And let's make that comparison. But don't talk about the bar, 200 years ago, right? So these are the 4 frames. Any of y'all know people, y'all ever heard people, use any of these frames? Right? So yeah, start calling them on it. Be like, yeah, Benia Silva would say. So then it got to be on you. I'm like, look, Dr. Benia Silva would say that. Right, that was minimization of race. Like, what does that mean? Go read the book. So talking about a good book, this is Dr. King's last book. Very few people know about this book, and it's because you got to read it. A buddy of mine told me, he was like, man, when you're reading this book, he said, if you don't look at the cover, you wouldn't know if you were reading Malcolm or Martin. And what he meant by that is he never abandoned his nonviolent principles, but he was pushing, right, for change. And he was calling people to task who he felt, sort of abandoned the movement, right? And this is what he had to say about, white liberals. I always like, mentioning this quote in the Pacific Northwest, because I'll let y'all put that together. Right? But most whites in America in 1967, including many persons of goodwill, proceed from a premise that equality is a loose expression for improvement. White America is not even psychologically organized to close the gap. Essentially, it seeks only to make it less painful and less obvious, but in most respects to retain it. Most abrasions between Negroes and white liberals arise from this fact. Right? Is that the Dr. King y'all get around his birthday? He was calling folks to task, right? And once again, when you think about how prophetic this is, think about the way that people talk to you about, like Ferguson and Garner, right? Always think about this quote when I get in these conversations. I kid you not, almost every conversation, not all of them, but every conversation I've had with, white faculty, white students around Ferguson, right? It's always this emphasis on why are they burning their property, rather than a human being was killed. What is wrong with you when your emphasis is on trying to understand what you can't get in that situation is why property is being damaged? But you're perfectly cool with, you're not maladjusted to the idea that an unarmed citizen was killed? That somebody was choked on camera? Why was he selling cigarettes? Are you serious? We having that conversation? When you saw him being choked in an illegal chokehold and there's no indictment, you want to know why he was selling illegal cigarettes, right? This is what Dr. King was talking about, right? Just looking for ways to justify the inequalities that exist. Don't want to close it, can't even psychologically, think about the importance of the fact that unarmed citizens are being killed, right? This is exactly what he was calling us to task about. So when you stop and think about continuing the legacy, which is a lot to, what people were speaking about earlier, it's extremely important because these are the people's shoulders, that we stand on. My mother texted me, she was like, do a good job. I was like, I'm going to honor the ancestors. Don't you worry about it, I got this, right? There are 2 things I asked. I just closed my eyes before I come up here. I was like, look, give me the strength to speak the truth and give me the strength to honor my ancestors, right? Other than that, I'm good. You can hate me when I'm done, cool. As long as I've done that, I'm good, right? And so when we talk about continuing the legacy, this is one of the people I had the opportunity to meet that makes me, think about this, all of the time. This is John Carlos from the '68 Olympics. I know y'all know that iconic photo, right? What a lot of people don't know is that for 40 years, he suffered for doing that. He couldn't find a job coaching track. And he placed 3rd at the Olympics, right? He was ostracized and followed. One of his wives, his first wife, killed herself, right? Because they couldn't pay their bills for simply protesting, right, in the 68 Olympics. And when he came to speak to our students at Highline, one of the things he said is, he was like, look, I ain't got no more courage than y'all got. I got the same amount of courage that y'all have, right? He said, but you know what? Me and Tommy Smith, who placed first, we were committed. And he was like, you know what committed is? He was like, committed is like pregnancy, right? Either you're pregnant or you're not, right? You ain't a little pregnant. What does that mean, right? And this is what he said commitment is, right? Either you're committed or you're not. Those of you that put this program on, y'all were committed to making a program run, right? Did it happen? Yup, all right? So I appreciate that, from the leadership here at the school and for bringing me out. So this is a picture of my kids, once again, both of them at, the Dr. King, Memorial in DC when they went to visit. And I always like this photo because it's them like standing in the shadow, right? Them being overshadowed by, Dr. King. And you just hope that in terms of, the legacy living on, that you resonate with your kids, right? Those of you that are still in college, I know, parents get on your nerves, right, every now and then, just a little bit maybe, right? But we really want to pass some things on. We want some things to resonate with you. And so this was an art project that my daughter did. Out of anything they could have drawn for this art project, she did a portrait of Dr. King, right? She wasn't coerced. She didn't come home and say, who should I draw, right? She did it at school. I ain't even know. And it actually, won, in the Kent School District and went on to be displayed, sort of statewide. Right, and she got, parts of his I Have a Dream speech, next to it. But I was like, damn, I guess stuff is resonating. Right, cool. Good job. Right. And so I like this quote by, Paul Robeson, right? I've simply tried never to forget the soil from which I sprang. And that's important for us, right? To never forget the soil from which we sprung, all right? Because it's easy to do. It's easy to be co-opted yourself, all right? It can happen. So, with that, I leave y'all with, I guess, sort of one thing. I got a chance to speak that to some high schools in Bellevue. And one of the things I told them is, it's important to start to think about where you stand, right, and what you've done. When your grandkids and your kids are sitting on your lap and they show something, from history like Ferguson, and they say, Dad, Mom, where did you stand on that? What were you doing, right? You want to be able to look into their eyes and tell them the truth. Right, that you acted in an equitable and just manner, rather than, no, I was trying to figure out why they were burning their neighborhoods. Right? You want to be that person, or you want to be the other person? So always remember what side of history you might be on, because very few of the people we respect now, when they were alive, people loved them, right? It wasn't that way. They get a lot of love now, but they were seen as agitators and troublemakers and problems when they were here, but are they on the right side of history now? And that's where y'all want to be, on the right side of history. So with that, I thank you. That's my email. Contact me if you like to. I don't know if I got a chance for Q&A. I know I got somebody else to introduce. I done ran my mouth. 2 questions. Short ones. Don't be asking no 3-4 parters. I go speak, and people like, I got a question. Part A. Yep. Yeah, I've seen that it actually might have exceeded, in some ways, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, absolutely. Malcolm X used to say, that racism was like a, Cadillac, right? Every year they produce a new model, and you can't fix, an old model with an old, instruction manual. And so that's why we had to always be updating ourselves on the way that these things shift and change, because we can't attack it the same way that we would have attacked it, historically. So now, instead of, sort of lynchings, which was also, law enforcement would be there. If y'all see any of the pictures, right, the sheriff of the town would be in the front pointing, right? Has morphed into, this, sort of thing. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. And then, like I said, on top of that, the fact that, people are okay with it. That's what really trips me out, right? That we're having conversations about burnings, the neighborhoods burning, but nobody's questioning, why there wasn't an indictment, right? So yeah. We can talk afterwards. Yeah.
What do you say to your students that say that it's better now than it was in the past?
I always use that slavery metaphor, about African enslavement, and then they really start to, put the pieces together. I always say, what's your measuring stick in terms of, it's better now than it's, been better before. So, yeah, some things have gotten worse, like you saw that gap, and then I, just hit them with data, all right. Try not to laugh at them, but it's all good. I'm kidding. But yeah, that's what I tell them. And then I, explain it in the context of, what Benia Silva was talking about. Yeah, that, no, there's a theory out there, on this. And of course, nobody wants to fit into those frames, right? So when they see themselves in those frames, they start to rethinking, their answer in the first place, or their question. Yeah. Is that it? I'll be around. Y'all can ask me some stuff later. What you want to do? Oh, thank you. So I have the opportunity to introduce Rebecca Marrall, Diversity and Disability Service Librarian. She will give her remarks and we will reintroduce the Associated Students President, Annika. Welcome, everybody.
Hello and good evening. My name is Rebecca and I'm the Diversity and Disability Services Librarian here with Western Library. As a librarian, it is my privilege to facilitate access to a lot of our collections here. And my role today is tied to that privilege. In the back, if you look over there, if you look in the back, there is a small collection of items pulled from many of our collections within Western Library about Dr. King, his work, and others like him. They come from our children's literature collection, they come from our reference collection, and our special collection, and heritage resources, and many more. One thing that came to me in pulling all of these materials from across our library is that you can find material about Dr. King's work in almost every corner of our library. And that's an amazing and wonderful thing to reflect upon because it really comments and drives home the importance of his work and his message and others like him. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Annika Wolters, the student president for Washington University.
Again, I just want to thank everybody for being here today. And as I'm hearing Darryl and Rebecca and Ted and Jordan speak, it really brings to light to me how many resources and opportunities we have on this campus, just how many we have in this library. She pointed to the table back there for books about Martin Luther King, and I encourage you to check those out, but I also encourage you to look at the photographs we have. There's a picture of a Vietnam sit-in behind the glass case over there. We have books on the American Indian up here as well. Just don't think that it's just restricted to that corner or this room or even this day today. Think of how many resources we can harness on this campus to keep this spirit and this energy and this event alive. We are beginning a tradition here. There have been celebrations of this day in the past, and they were usually planned and coordinated and frankly left to the Ethnic Student Center and its members to organize. And without taking anything away and without showing any disrespect to the work that has been done, this university will simply be adding to the pot. Students will always be the integral part in the piece in this celebration because we are the focal point of this campus. College students have always been the focal point of nearly every movement, and this is now a campus-wide celebration, and will continue to grow, I hope, year after year. Dr. Brice comes from a campus where they've been celebrating MLK Week for the past 15 or 16 years or more. Dr. King said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" So I want you to think about what you did yesterday. On this nationally recognized day, how did you spend it? Did you do enough? Did you do anything? Did you do anything for yourself? This is more than a 3-day weekend. It's more than a bank holiday and more than an extra day off. What did you do for others? It has become a tradition for the Associated students to organize and execute our biggest overnight trip to the state capitol on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So yesterday, I was with the AS in Olympia, lobbying with 90 other students on legislative issues such as college affordability, access to voting, ensuring the success of our students through out-of-classroom support and support for survivors of violence on this campus, and securing a safe academic facility for our community to use. I was with students of all majors, ages, and demographics, and we were together for the same reason, rode together peacefully on the same buses, and we were united with one another on the same issues. I couldn't help but think this is exactly where I was supposed to be. Now we know lobbying is not the only way to get the legislature to listen, of course. We're seeing action all across this country to continue to work to achieve the dream that we all know about. When Dr. King was arrested and jailed, he said, well, one of the times he was arrested, thank you. He said, "Somewhere I read that the greatness of America was the right to protest for rights." This is a time in our country unlike any other, and we must continue to organize and mobilize like we did yesterday at the Capitol, and we will not abandon the movement. We must keep learning. We know Dr. King was not alone in this. We must learn the names of those who came before and after, those who contributed. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, Reverend Ralph David Abernathy, Reverend Joseph Lowry, Reverend C.T. Vivian, Andrew Young, Congressman John Lewis, and others. We must continue the civil rights movement as it is far from over, as it never ended. As Sister Stacy sang earlier, we must march on till victory is won. And I want to begin again by acknowledging this gesture from the university that says, this is important to everyone. This fits the goal of increasing cultural awareness on university time and university resources. And I want to thank our school and ask that we see this day continue and grow. So thank you for beginning this grand tradition, and thank you for participating in the beginning of this grand tradition. I'd also like to thank the sponsors of this event, President Shepard's office, Senior Vice President Coughlin's office, Joanne DeMark in the Leeds office, Gary Malik and the VU Tech crew, WWU Libraries, and the Dean of Students. Now, in a few moments, we'll begin the award-winning documentary of Brother Outsider, The Life of Bayard Rustin. And before we begin, a 10-minute intermission to grab some refreshments and mingle and ask your questions, I just want to draw your attention to a couple of other events that are happening this week. We have a teach-in on the state of emergency, which is happening at 6 p.m. on Thursday in AW 304. And we'll be seeing something next Wednesday as well from Woodring. So please continue to learn, and please continue to educate yourself. Like you said, read the book, right? So go ahead and check out the books that have been pulled from the shelves, even on the walls here and behind the glass cases, and mingle with the people around you. And we'll begin the documentary in about 10 minutes.